Welcome to Date Her or Excommunicate Her, Reformed Relationship Advice with the Dating Expert. I'm your host, Micah Foster, and with me, as always, is the Dating Expert.
I am here in the flesh, or, well, not for all of you listening, but I do exist in the flesh, so that's at least nice to know.
Now, Dating Expert, it's been a little bit since we last recorded, to be completely honest. You know, the episodes don't necessarily come out when we record them.
Yes.
Yes. You know, in those last few weeks, could you give me just a vague estimate on how many dates you've been on?
I think we did a good job of people, giving people the idea of what is a date. Mm-hmm. And so I think based off all of that, I think we should leave it up to everyone's imagination.
Yeah.
I don't want to make people feel bad here.
Right.
That's not our business. Our business is not going about making people feel bad about, how they've been on dates in the past or how many dates they're currently going on. But I think, I've given you enough information that y'all can guess, guesstimate on how my dating life has been going. And I honestly, I just don't want to make everyone feel bad. Yeah. So I'm not going to speak much
for
more.
Sure. And that's fair. That's fair. And so I'm not going to give you like an over-under 100, 150. Yeah. But, we're not going to go there.
Yeah, but this would be reasonable over-unders.
Those would be numbers. Yeah. Those would be numbers.
They're numbers, agree. That you could say. So.
Okay, yeah. So our episodes have been released. We've been getting some feedback. Do you have any key feedback that you've gotten that you wanted to shout out anyone?
I think we've had lots of sponsors contact us.
For sure.
But there's one in particular that we're looking at, and if they're listening, we're willing to work. You know who you are. We've been in contact with you, and so we're willing to work together. If you know who you are, if you're that sponsor.
Exactly. Yep. And we're excited to have some people email us. We haven't had a ton of email communications yet. At dhehpodcast@gmail.com.
Yeah, so here's what I'll say. If you have any suggestions for the podcast, any podcast ideas, or honestly, like if you want to be interviewed on the show, maybe you have some advice you want to share the world. You can email us at our email, which should be in the description, or join our Discord.
Yep.
We want to get our Discord up and thriving.
Yeah.
And that'd be a good way to communicate more readily with us if you want to get in on the action, so to speak.
For sure. Yep. We have some potential guests coming up in the next few episodes, and if you're like, hey, I want to be on this show, I have the dating advice. Well, you probably don't because you're not the dating expert, but we'd be happy, excited to have you on, most likely. On the show today, speaking of guests, is Kevin DeYoung. Say hello, Kevin. Okay, no, he's not actually on the show,
he's not in.
Unfortunately, but we will be talking about Kevin DeYoung's book, Just Do Something. That's going to be our big topic today, and what he says about marriage. Have you ever read this book, Luke?
I have, but in all honesty, I don't remember it very much. But, today what we're going to be doing, I must say, is we're going to be laying into this thing. We are scrutinizing every aspect that we could possibly disagree with. So, don't come to this podcast if you expect like a softball, review of the book. We're going to dissect this thing with the utmost scrutiny. So
exactly.
Be ready.
For sure. Yep. So we're going to go after KDY today. And we love KDY. We ride or die with KDY. Yeah. I was telling you before we started recording that I think everything, or maybe I wasn't telling you this, so I was thinking, I think everything that I could say about dating and marriage is in this book. Yeah. And yet we're going to try and tear it to pieces.
Yes, we're going to try our best. Now, whether we'll succeed or not, you, the listener, will have to judge if we can actually find anything wrong with it. But, that's our goal today, at least.
Yeah. It is a great book in general, and it has a lot to say on marriage, and we're going to get into that. And we'll take our halftime break as always. Today we're playing a new game, or not a new game, a new segment called dating advice with the YouTube algorithm.
Yes.
We're both kind of people of the YouTube.
Yeah. Yep.
So we get some advice from there.
Oh,
and
yeah.
It's a great place to get advice.
Great place for dating advice. You know, honestly, I'll say this: I learned everything I know from the YouTube algorithm. You can
There
say.
you go. There you go.
Now, you know, I might not recommend everyone take that route. It comes with sacrifice, comes with a lot of other baggage, but to get to the top, you know, sometimes you have to sacrifice, and sometimes that means watching YouTube videos.
Yep, YouTube Shorts constantly.
Shorts constantly. That's what it takes to be a dating expert sometimes.
And then, of course, as always, we're going to finish out with Bible verse of the day.
Oh, yeah.
So let's jump into KDY's book. Now, to be clear, this book isn't really about marriage, but it's about decision-making.
Yeah.
And it has some advice on decision-making, like for marriage.
Yeah.
So we're going to start where he starts in this chapter, or in this section about marriage.
Mm-hmm.
He says that it seems like getting married is harder to do. This is all quotes. In 1965, the median age for first marriages was 22.8 for men and 20.6 for women. By 2002, it was 26.9 for men and 25.3 for women. And I'll add, if we look at statistics from 2020, more recently, those numbers have only gone up more and more.
Yep.
And we were looking at that the other day. I believe you were there when we were looking. I don't know if it's at up to 30, but it's kind of close.
Yeah.
Dating expert, what do you say about these marriage numbers going up? Is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Kevin DeYoung, as we'll see, is not a big fan.
Yeah, and I tend to agree. I think a lot of the reason it's a little interesting to argue whether in and of itself getting married later is a good or a bad thing. I think, you know, you could, for the most part, I would say in general it's better to be married younger to an extent, because I think one reason that I would say that is I think marriage shapes people in a lot of ways. So even if it matures people in a lot of ways, there's lots of things, especially for guys, in which it gives you something tangible to work for and some more responsibility, which in a lot of ways is good. You should be seeking more responsibility. And I think part of the reason that people are not getting married is because they don't want to have responsibility. And marriage gives you, especially having kids, which usually, should come through marriage, is a lot more responsibility. And a lot of times people are trying to run away from responsibility, and marriage is something that ties you down. And that, especially in a lot of people's minds, they want to be free. And marriage is not freeing for a lot of people. So they seek other ways to go about their lives, and then eventually they realize that those other ways are not very satisfying, and decide, okay, well, I guess I'm going to get married.
And it's important, guys, as the dating experts talking about marriage, remember, by our definition, marriage is directly connected to dating. So that also refers to dating. So what do you think that means if you know, you're saying that you would encourage people to get married younger? What does that mean for dating?
I think the part of the reason that people are taking so long to get married is because they're dating for the wrong reasons. They're dating in order to have fun, or to, you know, have sexual experiences or emotional experiences of some kind, as opposed to getting married, which is, if that's your goal from the beginning, from the time you turn 18, 19, 20, 21, whenever you decide to start dating, if that's your goal, then you're more likely to get married a lot sooner than if your goal is just to have fun, and then eventually you find a person who you really like and you'll settle down with them. If that's your goal, then
yeah, for sure. Now, would you say that so KDY here is saying that the median age, I haven't actually checked up on this, but I presume he's right, for getting married was 22 for men, 20 for women in 1965. Yeah. So with those numbers, I think a lot of people would say, okay, if I'm going to get married by then that means I need to start dating earlier. Would you agree with that?
Maybe. The other option is you don't date for as long, which I think was more of the case. Now, I think people still did sometimes start dating earlier back then, but I don't think it was much. I could be wrong. I don't think it was much earlier than they do nowadays. I mean, some people, sometimes you see like middle schoolers dating or something. Like, and I think that maybe it's not about the same amount of commonality, but I feel like that's more common now than it was back then. And either way,
for sure.
I think in general, I don't think people have started dating way earlier, or were dating way earlier, but that they took less time in the dating scene. So they didn't. A lot of the times they were more successful, let's say, in finding someone. Partially because I think more of them had the right goal, which was marriage, meaning you were more often to find a person you wanted to marry if that was your primary goal of looking for someone you want to marry.
Yeah.
And also I think people's attitudes about it in general leaned towards wanting to get married earlier and not, being as hung up as people sometimes are about finding that right person first, which I think can sometimes slow people down.
Yep.
When a lot of the times, they'll spend a few years dating someone, and then they'll realize, oh, this isn't the right person for me. Whereas back in the day, they would have already been married at that point. After spending a couple years together, unless outside of, extenuating circumstances. Like, people dated for a long time back then, too. I'm not saying they didn't.
Yeah.
But.
Have we talked on the show about the idea of like dating in high school and whether or not it's generally beneficial?
I don't think we have. That might be an episode.
Well, maybe it's a right now episode.
That's true.
Or maybe we need to talk longer at that. I remember saying at one point when I was in high school, I said to one of my friends, I was like, does God ever bless marriages, or not marriages, dating or relationships for young people? I remember a friend being like, obviously he does. Mary was like 14. And I was like, okay, fair. But
also your parents, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. My parents as well. So like and yet you and I, Luke, would probably lean more towards like not dating in high school. I think that's generally been your opinion. Why would you say that, or why not?
Yeah, well, first of all, on whether God blesses it or not, I think that's kind of a misconstrued idea of God's blessing. Because God blesses and uses terrible things sometimes for his glory. So saying, does God bless something that might not be optimal? It's like, well, he can. Does that mean he always will? No. It's just like saying, like, sometimes a bad decision works out good, Sometimes you make a terrible decision and it happens to be the good thing. Like, with your information, if you were a smarter, wiser person, that shouldn't have been the decision you made. But you made that decision and it happened to work out. That doesn't mean that decision was correct at that time. It was the wrong decision at that time. It just happened to work out.
Yeah.
So saying, you can't be results based in the sense that, oh, well, one person I know, their relationship worked. You have to actually have a reason why. Kind of like the Pastor Barker saying of don't ask why not, ask why. So why are you dating in high school? Is it likely to work out? Probably not. And there's lots of reasons. I could list many reasons why it's not a good idea to start dating, especially like early to mid high school. Once you're like basically graduated, especially if you're a girl, I think it matters a little less for a very large reason, I think. Is that, and the main reason it matters a little less for a girl, I think, is that in a healthy Christian relationship, it's the guy's responsibility to provide for the family. Now, I'm not saying that girls can't work, especially when they don't have children.
For sure.
So it's not to say that if you're a girl, you can't work, or even while you're married, you can't work. You can. That's definitely fine. But it's not your main responsibility. It's the guy's main responsibility. And if a guy is nowhere near to having any money, that means, in my mind at least, or having enough money to live off of himself, let alone support other people. In my mind, that means that he's probably not very close to getting married.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting that in 1965, the average age was 22.8 for men, I believe it said.
Yeah.
Which, if you think about it, like, that's 4 years out of high school.
Uh-huh.
So that could be university or college. That could be just establishing your career.
Yeah.
But that's like a reasonable amount of time.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that like 22 is a reasonable amount of time, and that also doesn't mean that you can't get married earlier. Like I don't think it's wrong to get married when you're not incredibly financially stable. I'm not one of those, like, there's some infamous people in our youth group who talk about needing a 6-figure job before and a house paid off before getting married. I'm definitely not saying that's the case. And I'm not even saying like it's wrong to get married while you're still in college, because I think if you have a reasonable prospect of making money in the future, then at least you're not gonna. It's not being completely irresponsible.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that in general, when the guys are younger, they're farther away from getting to that point where it's a good idea, and it'll be pretty good, a good idea to get married when they're younger.
Yeah, there's so much there. I feel like there's so much about young marriage. There's a few questions. Maybe we'll do a segment on on kind of the marriage ratio, if you'd rather get married later or earlier. That was a whole thing, and we're not going to get into it right now.
Yeah, but that's something you can. Listener questions are another thing that we'd really like.
Yes.
If you have any questions for us, just send them in either by joining the Discord or in the email, and we can make a segment answering your questions about dating, or even a whole episode if you send a whole bunch.
Yep, or about how young you should get married or how old.
Yeah.
But we're gonna move on. So KDY kind of offers like a 4 steps to deciding who to marry, which is in some ways, by our definition, dating and deciding who to marry is very related. He says search the scriptures and get counsel. We're gonna skip over those because boring. I'm just kidding. But those are mostly things we've talked about. Step 3 is pray, and in here is something I find interesting. He says, pray less that God would show you who is the right husband or wife, and pray more to be the right kind of husband or wife. If everyone was praying to be the right spouse, it wouldn't matter nearly so much who is the right spouse. What do you think about that, dating expert?
I think that's good advice. I agree with the idea that it's better to focus on yourself, on the you part of the equation, rather than praying that God would send you the perfect spouse. Because even if He does send you the perfect spouse, theoretically, if you're not the perfect, if you're like less than desirable to that theoretical perfect spouse, then that's also a problem.
Yeah.
So you need to, I think, in general, like with a lot of things in relationships in general, it's better to focus on yourself, because you can control yourself.
Yeah.
And you can't control,
And notably, like, not focusing on yourself, like, in a selfish way, but in focusing on the improvement being your improvement.
Yes.
And the problems being your problems.
Yes.
I think, I don't even know who would say this, but I'd hear stories before where, a girl, after she got married, would say, like, oh, like, I found an old notebook of my husband, and, like, every day he just, like, prayed for his future wife, like, as his number one prayer. And it's, like, that's admirable. Like, but also what's admirable is, like, praying for other people, praying for your sanctification. If you're spending a huge amount of your prayer life on, like, praying for a future spouse, is that like necessarily the best way to spend your prayer time?
No, I agree. I think, not to say it's wrong to pray that God would send you a spouse, especially like if you're actually struggling to find someone who is suitable at all, like then you should pray that God would put you in a situation where you can find someone. But if you're I think you should also be praying that you would become a better prospect spouse to someone else.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I find that hilarious.
Yeah.
Okay, Katie Weiss goes on. Step 4 is make a decision. Now, I think this like next paragraph or next sentence or like next pages probably impacted my opinion on like dating and marriage more than anything, other than I guess like the Bible and biblical wisdom. But anyway, it says, I know this might sound crass, and your parents might not appreciate the advice, but guys, if you like a girl and you're both Christians, and your friends and families aren't alarmed, and she actually likes you back, you should probably get married. What do you think about that advice, dating expert?
You know, I think that kind of comes to the crux of it here.
Yeah.
And I think that's a lot of this. It simplifies it a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it simplifies it a lot. But the reality is that if all those things are the case, which honestly it doesn't happen all the time. That's not true with every person you meet.
Yeah.
And you need to, like, it also kind of depends on what your definition of likes is, because if some people could take that and say, oh, well, we just met each other a day ago and we both like each other, so
marriage,
and we're both Christians, marriage time. But I don't think that's what I think he means. Obviously, he means within reason. Like, you've known each other for a while. But I think this is a very, very good statement, because, I mean, honestly, what more do you want? Like,
exactly.
Like, you can spend a lot of time, but at a certain point, if you're spending all that time, then do you really want to get married?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yeah. I mean, I think we're probably, you listeners are gonna hear us say time and time again, just date her, get married, whatever it is. Although it is kind of a crazy statement, I think it actually works out. Now, I was having a conversation with one of our listeners in the last few weeks about an idea of, like, how much should we be worrying about long-term compatibility, like personalities compatibility. What do you think about that? Because that's not really in this description. I guess you both like each other, but it doesn't say, and you're emotionally long-term compatible. Do you think that that's important in dating, in marriage?
I think it's somewhat important, in the sense that I think some of that is factored into both like each other, because to a certain extent, if you're completely incompatible, you're not going to both like each other unless there's some other problems going on. There might be an example of where you could both be, like, really into each other and not have actually spent much time together or gotten to know each other.
Yeah.
Which I think is part of the point, like, of dating, is spending some time actually, like, figuring out, do I actually like this person?
And I like that he says, like, he involves, like, if your friends and family are not concerned, because I feel like that roots out a lot of the problems as well.
Like, if there's a big problem with this person that you're blind to because you're so infatuated with them, then, you know, seeking advice, asking your pastors, asking your other friends and your family about this person, or if they bring it up to you, then I think that weeds out some of the people. But in all honesty, you're gonna have, most marriages don't happen between the perfectly emotionally compatible people. So, you know, you're gonna have problems in your marriage no matter what. Now, not to say that if you might have more problems if you marry someone who you're not as compatible with, theoretically, like emotionally or psychologically, but I think that a lot of those things can be worked through. And if you're willing to work through them, are not the end of the world. So I think emotional compatibility matters in the sense that, are you going to stop liking this person right away? Or is this just a temporary thing? You know, things like that you need to weed out when dating. But as far as most things that you wouldn't catch as immediate problems when you're dating, things like that, most of those things are just, they might be problems when you're married. There's going to be challenges in your marriage, so they might end up being some of those challenges, but they're not going to be the end of the world.
Yeah, that's good advice too, because I think figuring out emotional, or, like, I don't know, I guess just emotional would be the right word, compatibility feels like kind of an impossible task. Like, I wonder if I've said on the show that I think, like, to find out if you could marry someone, like, fully, you'd have to marry them.
Yes,
you literally have to marry them and live with them a lifetime to figure out if you could live with them for a lifetime.
Yeah. And I think there's plenty of examples of people who, you know, have, or might be very different, might be very contrary people throughout throughout history who have been married and had successful marriages.
Yeah.
So I think, you can work through a lot of those problems if you both want to.
Yeah. Okay. Now we've been talking KDY, but I think it's time for our halftime break.
Oh yeah, I'm excited.
I'm excited about this too. Let me pull this up.
Yes.
And let me get. Oh man. Okay. So this video is called. This video is called Christian Dating Tips for the ladies. The ladies.
The ladies.
Now let me move my laptop so you can see. Christian dating advice for the ladies. Now we're gonna play it. You guys at home, I don't know if you're gonna be able to hear this music. Maybe a little bit. There is music that goes with it.
Okay. So I'm gonna be explaining what's happening.
Wait.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. How about you pause it at each of the?
Wait. We'll pause it. Let's just watch through it.
Okay.
Okay, could you just explain what is on screen?
Okay, so what is on screen? So there's a, generic looking white guy with slightly faded jeans, navy blue shirt, and a white cowboy hat. So he's sitting there, and there's this he's standing there, and there's this I don't know if you can hear the music at all.
You can hear it a little bit.
Yeah, but it's like I don't even know how to describe it. Like kind of classic, like somewhere in, I don't know, what kind of music is that?
Like South American Hispanic
South American
music.
Hispanic.
I don't know if I'm allowed to say that.
I don't know what kind of music. It's some sort of music. Anyway, and he's standing there, and he's doing really weird dances.
Yeah,
he's
clapping along,
and like swiveling around. And
what I want to know is this video the guy who made this short, or is this just like a random video?
No, I think this is the video guy who made the short.
So what connection does dating advice for ladies have just a clapping cowboy?
I don't know. It's very weird. It's very weird.
Anyway,
okay.
There's text on screen. Let's go to the first tip. Okay.
Okay, and the text is just appearing, and he's not moving his lips.
No, he doesn't say anything.
He doesn't say anything. He's just dancing in the background of this. Okay, first one.
Here. Okay, so the first thing it says, run away. This is on screen. Dating tips for ladies. Run away if he says, God told me you are gonna be my wife. What do you think about that advice from the dancing cowboy?
From the dancing cowboy. I mean, I think it's correct. I would also say, if a guy comes up to you and says, God told me you're gonna be my wife, I would find that very weird as well.
Yeah.
So,
what if you've been dating for 3 or 4 months and you're like. And the guy's like, hey, I've just been praying a lot recently, and I really feel like God's leading me to be your husband. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's still a little sus. It's kind of a misunderstanding of how God works in a way, I think, because you can say God's been leading me this way on certain things, but to say God's been leading you for a decision like that, to say, well, God's been leading me to do this, it's like, well, no, you want to do this. It's not like God has been speaking to you in your prayers. And I think the guy who does this video is a little bit Pentecostal too, so that might add a little more, because he could say, because they kind of talk about God actually saying things, and if they think that, then especially if a girl comes you don't want to be saying that.
That's even kind of interesting that even someone who may lean more towards the Pentecostal side of things is still saying hey, just stop, run away.
Realistically, he might have heard that thing could actually happen more often in Pentecostal circles, because they think God could actually talk to you.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, the next piece of advice from the dancing cowboy.
Oh yeah.
Okay. It says, one-on-one Bible study date is a no. X.
No, it's
big red X.
No, yeah,
it's
2 X's.
Big two.
Is a X, no. X.
Yeah.
The no in between the X's.
Okay, so what do you think about that, Luke? No, one-on-one Bible study. No, and then wait, there is actually another piece of this. I forgot.
Yeah. Let's see what else he says.
It also says. He He says, that is way too intimate. And then it has a guy, a little white man emoji of Xing it out.
Yeah.
And he does his weirdest dance in this part
Yeah,
as well.
he starts. It's very weird.
I don't know what's with that.
Yeah, that's a little weird.
And that's all of his advice, I think, right? Yeah, that's it. That's his entire advice for ladies.
Yeah,
so what do you think? No one-on-one dating? It's way too intimate.
I think way too intimate is a little weird. Like, how is that much more intimate than any other date? Like,
yeah.
I mean, I get what he's saying. Though you don't. I get what he's saying though. You don't want to like. I get what he's saying with it can be way too intimate. Like, I would probably not do that like as a first date. That is a little weird. But studying the Bible together, especially if you've been dating for a while, I don't think that's.
I mean,
that doesn't seem. Like,
I think that's really a good thing. Like,
yeah, I think you should be studying the Bible together.
Yeah, I don't.
Maybe not like tucked away in some secret room somewhere. I think that I get like if you're going out like in some secret room to do a Bible study or something. Like,
yeah,
all
and
by
maybe
yourself. Maybe I understand what he's going with.
And maybe if he's like saying like if someone asks you out, like it
yeah,
says like, hey girl, want to go like study the Bible?
Study date?
Yeah,
that does
maybe a little weird.
That is a little weird as a first date or someone just asking you out.
That's way too intimate.
It's way too intimate. So I mean, maybe in that case it could be like a little too intimate for a first date setting, but I don't know. Like, I think studying the Bible together is a good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. If a guy is like trying to do that just to like, I don't know, is like using that to try and get like sneaky date, like oh, you want to study the Bible together?
Yeah.
Then that's a little weird, but that's not what he's kind of implying here.
Yeah, and I think like if you're dating, you should probably be old enough and have the maturity enough to like be able to have a Bible study with someone else and like be fine, like that, and it not be way too intimate.
Yeah. I don't know what this one's getting. How is this more intimate than most other dates?
What is he just like? I don't know. Is he only for like courting? It's possible.
Yeah, he could be like no being by yourself at all.
Right.
Which I think is, especially if I think is reasonable to some extent for someone to, especially if the people are younger.
Yeah.
To say, we don't want you off on dates by yourself if it's like a younger people dating. Then that makes sense to me at least. But for like an average like Christian guy just dating, Christian guy and Christian girl dating, I think you can't, unless you're going with a system where there is more supervision at all times.
Yeah, it's just weird to avoid studying the Bible.
It's weird to avoid
and
this
be like
specific.
Okay with anything else.
If you're okay with just going like, we're going out to dinner together by ourselves, okay?
Yeah, fine.
And then we say, we're going to study the Bible together.
Double red X. No.
Everyone in the family comes with the X mark. Comes up.
That is way too intimate.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah, it's funny.
And if studying the Bible together is too intimate, like what else are you avoiding?
Yeah.
What's allowed, but
what's
studying
allowed?
the Bible isn't allowed.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we've got a few more things to cover with our guy KDY, and then we're gonna go to our Bible verse of the day, which is kind of a hard one. So I want to leave time for that. So maybe just like a tiny bit more with KDY. Now, the next kind of section, he absolutely destroys the idea of the one.
Yeah, we've already kind of talked about that.
Yeah, so we can skip over that, and then he talks about the problems with not getting married or waiting to get married, and he says one of the problems with delayed marriage is that it complicates career decisions, especially for women. And then he goes on to talk about how women will go into careers when they don't really want to be going into careers.
Yeah.
And then he also puts the blame of that on young men and not being bold enough. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's kind of a tough thing to talk about because for a lot of our generation and even some of the previous generations, the idea of women, you know, women working was the ideal. Like that's been pushed as like you want the women to be working. It's actually in a lot of cases not as preferable for the women to not be working, which I think is the opposite of how it should be. I think it should be preferable for the woman not to work, or at least not to have to work. If she has something she wants to do and has the ability to, and she's not shirking her responsibilities in the home, then I think it's perfectly fine for women to have jobs. But a lot of this has been pushed, and even in girls that don't really want to work, it's kind of just the default of what everyone expects of you.
Yeah.
And so I think it puts a lot of pressure in that sense.
Yeah.
But I also think he's right in the sense that, but I wouldn't say it's just the guy's fault for a couple of reasons. I think part of the problem is that the women aren't expecting to be married as young. So I think that, now I'm not saying it's anyone's fault in particular. I'm not saying it's like the girl's fault either. I think it's mostly the fault of the culture and the things people expect. But I think there's to some extent where it goes both ways in that the young women aren't expecting to be married super early necessarily because not very many other people in our culture is.
Yep.
And the young guys don't expect that either. Like they're not out there saying, "Oh, I'm definitely going to get married very soon." They might want that to some extent, but it's not like the norm. It's not what normally happens, so it doesn't happen as often.
Right.
Just naturally, because people aren't expecting that to happen. It's not what's expected of anyone.
And he goes on to talk kind of about that, but like once a woman is told or expected, right, like you said, like, oh, I'm not going to get married out of high school. I'm not going to get married soon after high school. So then, well, what am I going to do? I guess I should go off to college. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but then once you start getting your degree, maybe you start a career, then it becomes harder to start a family. And he kind of points that out, that once a woman has a career, maybe she's less likely to want to get married and want to start a family if she started something else. And again, he says that the way to fix that would be to have guys who are just pursuing women at a younger age so that the path won't even begin.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable to say. I think it is correct to say that guys should be pursuing women more. Not aggressively, but I mean, to a certain, my dad would say be aggressively. That's kind of his.
What does that mean?
Well, he says that to everything. When I'm when someone complains about washing his dishes, he says, be aggressive. When someone says, it's taking too long to clean, he says, be aggressive. That's just what kind of he says to everything, and including dating advice in general. Like his number one tip for me was be aggressive. And aggressive, I don't think we often talk to him about how we're not sure that he's using aggressive in quite the right term, because aggressive generally means maybe some amount of like violence or something. But he says no, it just means be aggressive.
So he's using it like more like be assertive.
Yeah, assertive. But he says aggressive.
That's hilarious.
So I think he's right in the sense that you need to take initiative. You need to be the one to, just naturally in the relationship, you need to be the one to get it started, to get it going under most circumstances. And so, if you're kind of apathetic and not really out there doing that, then it's not going to happen nearly as often. So he's right in the sense that in order to fix the problem, the guys need to take the first step of getting out there and going on more dates, asking people to marry, actually having relationships early on with the goal of getting married in that relationship. Meaning, like, you're having that relationship and saying, I want the product to be of a relationship to be finding someone to marry. That's the optimal outcome.
Yep, for sure. Yeah.
And then naturally, I mean, women might be more or less receptive to that, but it takes time to change those kinds of initial gut reactions.
Yeah.
Because part of the problem might be that some women, because of how they're influenced by their culture, their gut reaction is, "Yeah, no, I don't need to get married this young."
Mm-hmm.
But that can change. That does change with people's perceptions of it, and if people's perceptions change, then those kind of feelings will go away.
Yeah. Yep. So be aggressive, man. That's
aggressive.
a real takeaway from today's episode.
Yes,
be aggressive. Be aggressive, and one-on-one Bible studies way
too intimate.
Bible verse of the day comes from Ephesians 5:22. That's not quite right. 31 through 32. It says, "Therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This mystery is profound, and I'm saying that it refers to Christ and the church." And hopefully you know the context of that, dating expert, because that is kind of important. What do you think that this verse or this section of verses in Ephesians is saying about marriage? And then because of that, what is it saying about dating or not saying about dating?
I think that in the base level, it's saying that when you and your wife get married, you become your own entity. In a sense. So you're not part of the entity you were previously of, that being the other household.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's essentially the main point, is that you're not part of that other household anymore. You have your own household that you're taking care of. And that's true for guys, in the sense that you don't want to be dependent on your family at that point anymore.
Yeah.
That's part of the reason you want to have a job, is you don't want to be dependent when you're married. And it's true for girls in a little bit more specific sense, in which there's a sense in which guys are more independent even when they're single, because in a lot of cases, at least, especially like in the Old Testament, it was definitely presented this way. That being that the girls were a lot more part of their father's household and under his authority while they were there, and they lived and they didn't move out on their own like people do today. They couldn't like that. So their society wasn't built to work like that.
Yeah.
So they literally had to stay in their father's house.
Yeah.
For
but
most of their adult life.
I also think I think that is a very right and true application, and we're not gonna. I guess maybe we don't get into what it means that it refers to Christ and the church right now, because that's a whole nother conversation. But the two shall become one flesh. I actually think that there's a whole bunch of spiritual implications there outside of just household implications. Yeah,
I think it become. I think it. There's lots of ways, as with lots of things in the Bible, there's multiple ways that you look at this. There's the obvious physical reality that they become one flesh. There's physically they do in that sense. They become each other's. But the spiritual application, I think, is that in general it means you should be of one mind. I think is one way to do it, because you become one flesh, and one flesh in general is on the same page. So I think
has unity.
Yes, it has unity. So I think not only physically is it saying that you should be one flesh, but I think also it's saying that you should be on the same page.
Right.
With the thing, not just what you believe, but what your course of action is to be. So I think fundamentally it requires unity in physically and in your mind.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and not to take the dating expert's role, but to apply that to dating, it reminds us again of the seriousness of dating.
Yeah.
That you're going to, this person who you find, again, dating is about the intentions of getting married. This person who you're dating, who you hope to eventually get married to, you will become one flesh with that person.
Yes.
So you can't just play around casually when we're talking about unifying, binding yourself to someone else.
Yeah. Yes. It's a very serious. It's in some ways it's the most serious institution that we have. That's not a sacrament in the sense that it shows the most clear picture of Christ's relationship to the church, which is part of the reason why I think someone said this in our church the other day, or maybe I don't remember. Maybe it was someone in our church said this. It was an elder or someone I think talked about how marriage is so sacred because it's such a clear picture of Christ in the church.
Exactly.
And so I think it's used many times in the Bible as that picture, and so that's part of the reason why adultery is such a serious sin, is because marriage is that very clear picture of Christ in the church, instituted by God to be that, and also to do lots of other things which God made it to.
Exactly, and the sin of divorce and 100 other things we could get into. But if marriage is that significant and that serious, then dating is that serious, significant and that serious. And so when we tell you to just go out, get married, go out and date. Yeah.
We're not saying take it lightly and just go do it. We're saying there's better strategy. Let's put it that way. There's better strategy than other strategies. Not to say that you should take it lightly and not actually put thought and effort into it.
For sure. Well, that pretty much brings us to the conclusion of the 3rd episode of Date or Excommunicator. I almost called Will They Won't They, but not anymore. Who knows what our next episode is going to be on? I'm hoping to get a guest on very soon, other than just real KDY who was here today. Please, again, send us all your great ideas at dhehpodcast@gmail.com or dhehpodcast on Instagram. DM us. At us. That's not Twitter, right? That's not or X. Sorry.
You could try and at us. I don't think we have an X account.
No,
we wouldn't get it.
You could just have a post.
Yeah,
that,
Instagram
tag us on a
Instagram post and tag us.
That's just like a question to us. We're fine with that, actually. We allow that.
Or you could video your question, and we could respond.
No, if you don't personally know us or don't personally know us really well, you need to do that. Just DM us, email us, post about us. We want to know who you are.
Oh yeah. We want to know our demographic. We want to know our demographic. We want fan interaction.
Exactly.
So it'd really help us out. We'd really appreciate it if you communicated with us through any of those means.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you guys, and see you next week.
Goodbye.